Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are about to begin our afternoon session. So let's begin. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I call this meeting to order. We shall now begin our consideration of agenda item number 9, policy issues for the Asia-Pacific region. The theme topic for the 74th session of the Commission on Inequality in the Era of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. I would like to mention that this discussion is being website live, so we welcome all those who are connected to us virtually. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, the Commission has before it the document ESCAP/74/42, Inequality in Asia and the Pacific in the Era of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The document is a summary of the theme study and contains a review on the region's inequality trends, the multifaceted challenges for sustainable development, and policy gaps across different types of inequalities. It also discussed the potential impact of inequality on people, communities, and countries. It contains a broad set of policies, options for reducing all forms of inequality for a more inclusive, prosperous, and sustainable future for all. Our discussions this afternoon and tomorrow morning will examine the key trends and emerging drivers of inequalities in Asia and the Pacific, and what policy options may help build more inclusive, resilient, and equitable societies in the region. We have the privilege to have a few outside speakers to kickstart today's session. After their statements, I will open the floor for country interventions. Before we get to our speakers, may I invite the Executive Secretary to introduce the findings of the theme study as summarized in document ESCAP/74/42. Executive Secretary, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excellencies, distinguished guests, a welcome from me also to this session, Inequality in the Era of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. By way of background, let me share with you, as the Chair mentioned, the analysis and key messages of the report on inequality. These, of course, have profound implications for policymakers. So the first is inequality is on the rise in our region, as I mentioned in my opening remarks this morning. Market-led growth alone is insufficient to deliver an inclusive, prosperous, and sustainable future. Over the past 30 years, income inequality increased in 4 of the 5 most populous countries, who are home to over 70% of the region's population. China's income inequality rose by close to 10%, Indonesia's by over 8%, and Bangladesh and India's by 4 and 5%. Of course, our analysis is based on the data from the countries themselves, and also where we could lay hands on the information. Inequality of opportunity and access to services are pervasive. In the region, education, clean fuels, basic sanitation, and bank accounts remain out of reach for many citizens, and only some 40% of the region's population has access to healthcare services, and piece of information that I also provided this morning. While some income inequality is arguably inevitable and can be tolerated, inequality of opportunity is a real barrier and a burden to development. The second message that I'd like to convey is the rise in inequality has, as we all know, enormous opportunity cost. For instance, evidence for Asia Pacific indicates a 1 percentage point increase in Gini coefficient reduces the GDP per capita by over $150 in our countries. Had income inequality not increased, as I said this morning, over the past decade, close to 140 million more people could have been lifted out of poverty. And women could have had the opportunity to attend school. In many countries, only 5 out of every 100 women from poor rural household can complete secondary education. The third message that I've extracted from the report is that inequalities perpetuate environmental shocks. Poor households rely on traditional and inefficient fuels for cooking and heating, so the indoor air pollution causes for health deterioration, but also more than 2 million deaths per year in China and India alone. Natural disasters cause disproportionately greater impacts on poorer countries and most vulnerable who live increasingly in the coastal or the flood-prone areas and also in the cyclone-exposed coastlines and belts. The fourth message is that a digital divide and newer frontier technologies can perpetuate inequality. The disruptive impacts of technology are likely to be of an unprecedented speed and scale, and there are risks that the benefits of technological progress will not be shared evenly. So, what would it take to reverse inequality? Of course, simple answer is invest in people. The 2030 Agenda, Goal 10, offers a framework for addressing inequality in all its form, as mentioned by the chair, driven by commitment to leave no one behind. In a diverse region like Asia and the Pacific, reversing inequalities calls for suitable solutions supported by a range of policy options that entail costs. So investing in social protection floor through income support, such as cash transfers encompassing basic healthcare services, primary and secondary education, and vocational training to low-income families. Our region has adopted a wide variety of social protection schemes, as I mentioned this morning. And I think all these schemes, as they are operationalized, will contribute to stabilizing the situation somewhat, although they as yet haven't reached the scale of universality. What I didn't talk about was Kazakhstan and the Philippines, who have closed the education gap, not only in terms of access, but also quality, so that those two countries need to be recognized a bit. ESCAP social protection toolbox is useful to demonstrate how social protection delivers returns. The other is that climate change, disasters, and environmental degradation magnify inequality. What's happening is that climate change is magnifying disaster risk, which ends up dragging people back into poverty. And of course, there are climate displacements also. Investments in the adaptive capacity of communities in the regions most vulnerable and disaster-prone areas, such as small island states, river deltas, semi-arid regions or cities, are essential. Environmental degradation undermines livelihoods and has a disproportionate impact on the health and welfare of poorer communities. So developing and understanding the transmission channels by which environmental hazards impact on poor and disadvantaged groups helps target better resolution mechanisms for environmental contamination and degradation and air pollution. ESCAP has been working to develop environmentally sustainable and low carbon pathways, better urban planning, and spatial development. Colleagues are here, they can share with you what exactly we have been doing, but it's also available on our website. Among the two items that I have talked about, let me mention that increasing effectiveness of fiscal policy is a precondition for tackling inequality. An effective tax system with an adequate level of progressivity and strong revenue generating capability ought to be deployed across countries to redistribute the higher flows coming out of our domestic taxation, to redistribute spending, because it's resource allocation also, which is equally important. Of course, on the frontier of the tax, tapping resources from the vast income and wealth that has been accumulated would be a great idea, and it's another way of having progressivity. And in terms of public expenditure management, there are still a number of countries with very low spending on social protection mechanisms, so including, of course, education and health. So re-examining the resource allocation mechanism, but also introducing efficiency in spending will help with focused delivery on services. In many parts of Europe and in developed parts of Asia, Gini coefficients can be high, but after taxes and transfers, they fall by up to 20% to establish more egalitarian societies and economies. So let's look at that, those examples where we have egalitarian societies and economies. Effective public financial management, as I pointed out, supported by stronger governance regimes and strong political will, is needed to ensure tax structures are balanced and boost compliance, and to improve the composition and efficiency of public expenditures. So resource mobilization, either through the tax vehicles, or for that matter from streamlining and rationalizing and tightening the public expenditure, or reorienting the expenditures, is a very sustainable approach to deepen our impact on inequality. Finally, improvement in data collection and proper identification numbers are key to target both tax compliance and redressal of inequality. I talked this morning about the national ID system, and some of them have really innovated in this area. Some countries is very critical to make sure that the cash transfer goes into accounts that belong to the poor people. To identify those at risk being left behind and target policy making, national data collection efforts need to be magnified, as I see. And among other things, it's important that the data is disaggregated enough for us to be able to see what, and for the governments, first of all, to be able to target better. Better surveys are needed to capture how unequal opportunities impact on individual and household decisions, and why certain families take their children out of school or continue using unhealthy and polluting energy options. Among other things, it's important that all the household income expenditure surveys, which are very critical for the estimation of inequality, are actually made publicly available. So I would very much encourage the statistical agencies to adopt open and transparent mechanisms to look into the estimation of the poverty inequality. So to conclude, Asia Pacific is not fully on course, as we see, to reduce inequality in line with the SDGs. As a region, we are moving further away from them in some areas, but governments have a range of tools at their disposal to better understand and address the challenges associated with inequality. With this, let me now give the floor to our eminent speakers, who I'm sure will bring more value to this, this consultation process. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Executive Secretary. Without further ado, may I invite to the podium Mr. Lucas Chancho, co-director of the World Inequality Lab at the Paris School of Economics, to deliver his remarks.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. So, first of all, what is perhaps atypical for a Frenchman, I will speak in English. So I would like to apologize to our French translator over there for having to translate my poor quality English into refined French. So let me start by saying that inequality is to some extent inevitable. However, if not properly addressed and managed, if not properly measured, it can lead to unsustainability. It can lead to various forms of political, economic, social, and also environmental crises. One of the preconditions to prevent these crises to happen is to properly track inequality, and perhaps sometimes to revise some of the preconceived ideas that we may have regarding inequality and growth. This is what I would like to do in this presentation, drawing from the recently released World Inequality Report, which itself relies on the work of over 100 researchers located over the 5 continents. So here are 3 preconceived ideas on globalization, inequality, and growth. The first one goes on saying that there has been a decrease in global inequality between world citizens since the 1980s, thanks to high growth in the emerging world. The second idea is that trickle-down is an efficient way to reduce poverty. Put it differently, the more growth there is at the top of the social ladder, the more growth you see at the bottom. And the third idea is that, after all, there is no real alternative to rising inequality, because this is the result of technological change in our societies and of globalization and openness. Well, 40 years of data, which were collected and analyzed in the course of this World Inequality Report 2018, now allow us to revisit these preconceived ideas and refute them. So let us start with the evolution of inequality in 5 key countries and regions, with here a simple indicator, which is the top 10% national income share, or the share of national income accruing to the 10% richest in each of these regions, namely India, the USA, Russia, China, and Europe. And we see here that inequality is increasing in all regions. However, this increase happens at different speeds. Let me focus on the case of Russia, for instance, the purple line, which is the most equal country in the subset in 1990, and which becomes, in just the course of 5 years, the most unequal country in this subset. So it's an explosion of inequality in a very short amount of time. On the other end of the spectrum, look at Europe, the green line. There is a moderate rise of inequality in this region. There is a rise, but this rise is much more limited than in other countries. So when we see these lines, we may say, okay, there's a rise of inequality within countries, but at the level of the world, this doesn't mean that there's a rise of inequality between global citizens because of high growth in India and in China in particular. So now, for the sake of the exercise, let us look at the world as if it was a single country. So let us erase the boundaries between these different countries and look at how inequality evolved between global citizens since 1980. So this is what we see on this graph. So what I do here is I sort the global population from the poorest on the left to the richest on the right. We have 100 groups here, and in fact the top group, so the top 1%, is itself divided into many subgroups to see much more precisely what is happening at the very top. And what do we see? What is plotted on the vertical axis is the total income growth rate, net of inflation, from 1980 to 2016 for each of these groups. We see on the left-hand side of the graph very strong growth in the emerging world, over 100%. This is very important. And this is indeed related to the rise of India, China, and other emerging countries. In the middle of the global income distribution, we see growth rates that are much lower, below 50%, and this corresponds to the squeezed bottom 90% in the US and the EU. And in fact, in the US, as I will show in one or two slides, growth rates were actually close to zero for the bottom 50%. Now, if we go to the right-hand side of the graph, the global top 1%, and they come from everywhere, US, EU, Asia, Latin America, also in Africa, income growth was higher than 200%. So there's really an explosion of incomes at the top. Now, what is also very important in this graph is the two boxes at the top, showing that the top 1% actually captured 27% of total growth since 1980. So this is twice as much as the entire growth captured by the bottom half of the world population. So now some of you may say, actually this huge growth at the top was important for growth at the bottom. It was necessary. Well, let us now look at what is happening within countries to assess this claim. And let me just conclude this first part by saying that the conclusion of this graph is a rise in global inequality between world citizens. This is what we see, contrary to the first preconceived ideas that was exposed at the beginning. Now let us look at the trickle-down argument. And here we have India on the left and China on the right. We have two indicators for each country, the share of income accruing to the top 1% within each country in blue, and the share of national income accruing to the bottom 50% in blue, and the share of the top 1% in red. So what we see is a strong increase of inequality in both countries. However, the rise of inequality was much more important in India than in China, where we see a stabilization of inequality since the mid-2000s. Now, what is important to have in mind here is that if we look at growth rates at the very top of the income distribution of the two countries, these growth rates are relatively similar. Over 2,000% income growth for the top 0.01% in India and in China. However, one of the two countries, China, was able to have much faster growth for the bottom 50% than in the other country, India. This very high growth at the bottom in China is not related to very high growth at the top in this country. It has much more to do to strong investments done in infrastructures, for transport, for education, in health systems for the poor that were able to be implemented in China and that were not implemented in India as much as they could have been. Now let me continue this argument by comparing two other countries and regions, the USA on the left and Western Europe on the right. We again have two indicators, the top 1% income share and the bottom 50% income share. What you see in the USA is an explosion of inequality, with the share of the top 1% moving from 10% of national income in 1980 to 20% today. Whereas at the same time, the share of income accruing to the bottom 50% decreased from 20% to 10%. So it's a complete inversion. And this was possible in the US because there was an explosion of top incomes and near zero growth for the bottom 50%. So we're very far from trickle down here. Now, what happened in Europe is lesser growth at the very top of the distribution, but more growth at the bottom than in the USA. So Europe, despite lower growth at the top, was better able to manage to share growth for the bottom 50%. And this explains why inequality increased at a lower rate in Europe than in the USA. So basically, trickle down can be seriously questioned. Now, the other important analysis that can be made from these two comparisons is the following. We're here comparing two regions that have broadly the same size, broadly the same average income, broadly the same technological level, and broadly the same exposure to globalization. However, in one case, we have an explosion of inequality, and in the other, we have a relatively moderate increase. So it is hard to say, when looking at these graphs, that inequality is a mechanical consequence of new technologies and of globalization. It has much more to do with policy choices and institutional changes that were made in the different regions. In particular, European countries were more able to preserve some degree of progressive taxation, which was discussed before, were more able to secure equalitarian access to education, this was also discussed, to secure equalitarian access to health systems, and to have a certain degree of protection of low-income workers than in the USA. So this leads me to the future. What is going to happen in the future? No one knows. However, we can make projections. And this is what I'm doing on this graph, where we see the evolution of global inequality with the top 1% global income share in red and the bottom 50% global income share in orange, from 1980 to 2016 and then to 2050. We see different scenarios here. In red, you have the business as usual scenario for the top 1%, where we see that if countries continue to distribute growth from today to 2050 onwards in the same way as they did since 1980, this will lead to a further increase in global inequality. And this despite the strong growth that will happen, at least in these projections, in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America. So between country convergence is not sufficient to lead to a reduction of global inequality. Now, if all countries follow the US path of the 1980 to 2016 period, this would lead to a further rise in global inequality. This is what you see on the blue curve at the top of the graph. Now, if all countries follow the US path, the EU path, how the EU distributed growth since 1980, we would see a slight reduction in global inequality. Now, do not mistake me, I don't want to be too pro-European here. We would still be very far from a convergence of the top 1% income share at the global level and of the bottom 50% income share. But the message that I want to make here is that policy matters. It matters a lot to reduce inequality within countries and to reduce inequality at the global level. So let me just have two final words here on how to reduce inequality. Many topics have been discussed in the previous intervention. Here, just one slide to show the evolution of tax progressivity in rich countries since the 1970s. We see a strong reduction in tax progressivity. So this is the top marginal tax rate on the income tax in rich countries since 1970s, and we see this strong reduction. Tax progressivity is itself a proven tool to limit rising inequality at the top, but also to finance in a fair way the necessary investments in education, in health, in infrastructure, transportation systems, for instance. So what about Asia Pacific and emerging countries more generally? Let us look at this graph. That's the final that I will present today, where we see the top inheritance tax rate in emerging and rich countries in 2017. We see that there is no inheritance tax in China, in India, in Russia, in South Africa, and is very low in Brazil. So this means that there is a large room for maneuver in terms of the tax progressivity debate in the emerging world and in the Asia-Pacific region in particular. So let us summarize these key findings. Inequality is on the rise globally, despite high growth in emerging countries, and in business as usual, this will continue. Now we have also found out that huge growth at the top was not necessary to lift boats at the bottom. In fact, with more equitable growth since 1980, global poverty could have been reduced much faster. The good news in this relatively negative picture is that the rise of inequality is not mechanical. It is the result of policy choices. So much can be done by policy. More discussion on these policy issues can be found in the World Inequality Report, which is available online and accessible for free at wir2018.world. And let me conclude by first thanking ESCAP countries to organize this conference and to commit to address rising inequality, and second, by expressing the support of the research community to help ESCAP countries, first to track their progresses related to inequality reduction, and second, to reach this objective of a fairer and sustainable future. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Channel, for sharing your valuable perspectives. Is Professor Armida Alishaban-Pana, Director of the SDG Center at Patel University and former Minister for National Development of Indonesia. Madam, please come.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to all of you. It is my pleasure to be given this opportunity to contribute and present ideas on inequality of outcomes, especially as they relate to inequality of opportunities. The issues are pertinent and one of the key issues of Sustainable Development Goals. They are interrelated and not only about SDGs goal number 10. My presentation will focus on 3 areas. First, on sources of inequality of outcomes and how inequality of opportunity, more importantly, human capital investment, fits into the overall framework. Second, as an example, reference is given to inequality of opportunity in education and health for Indonesia, what the data and trend show for the past 15 years. Third, specific policy framework and implementation to address inequality of education and health opportunity. Literature, country studies, case studies are abound on what causes inequality of outcomes. There are several or combination of factors. Sources of growth which tend to exacerbate inequality are capital or resources intensive sources of growth, coupled with concentration of assets or resources. Regressive subsidy policy as opposed to progressive, and inequality of opportunity, namely in human capital development, education, health, as well as the provision of basic infrastructure, basic services, and also on employment opportunities. Education and health are seen as the cornerstone of human capital, the accumulation of which needs systematic and persistent investment. Let me share with you the overall Indonesia human capital endowment based on the most recent data. Despite the significant improvement over the past 3 decades, significant challenges remain, one of which is on inequality of opportunity, which I will delve in the following slides. And also to mention here is the potential of Indonesia's human resources endowment, which is the sizable number of the young generation, in this case, the millennials. In Indonesia, the number of the millennials is about 90 million in 2018, which is very huge. Now, let us turn to the next two slides, yes, slide number 7 and 8, which highlight the persistent gaps in access to opportunity in Indonesia with specific reference to education and health. What are the status and trend of inequality of opportunity in education and health in Indonesia? I refer to the study, actually I took the study commissioned by UN ESCAP last year, 2017, the summary of which is as follows. So slide 7 is highlights on the education, the significant gain during the past 3 decades, and then also the issues on the inequality of opportunity, and then slide 8, the highlights on health. And then the next slide, basically the summary, which I will read as follows. Although on average, development achievements have been positive in education and health, the analysis reveals mixed progress in terms of convergence between groups, which shows that inequality of opportunities still persists, especially with regard to education and health. The gap in the number of schooling years between the top 10% and the bottom 40% has been quite large and seems to be worsening during the last 15 years, the period of observation. In the health sector, interregional disparity, which in this case between Java, non-Java, and then between urban and rural areas, are still large. And then access to water and sanitation between income groups, between the top 10% and to bottom 40%, is also very unequal. So it's quite persistent. Now let's turn to specific policy implication on human capital investment. Government policies and programs should address, certainly, and target the 40%, not only the 10 or 20% lowest, but in my opinion, the 40% lowest population in terms of access of the following. For the education sector, equitable and quality universal senior secondary education. It's not sufficient only to focus on the primary education, and also assuming primary education already achieve universal education. And the integration of industry in the wider sense, including services industry, certainly the potential ones, depending on the countries, with the education that prepare the skills and competencies needed. For example, vocational education, including vocational education at the senior secondary level, as well as at university level or the so-called polytechnic education. Then how to simultaneously reap benefits from opportunities arise from Industry 4.0 and digital economy. Many examples have shown that these opportunities benefit the self-employed, the SMEs, not only in terms of logistic payment system, but also in marketing, design, better quality products. Continuous lifelong learning and education of the general population, bearing in mind that several countries in Asia Pacific have undergone aging process, or even some have entered aging society. The point is how also to prepare the economy and population to reap the so-called the double demographic bonus, not only the demographic bonus, but the double demographic bonus. On health investment, the focus would be on investment in the first 1,000 days of lives in terms of nutrition and child rearing, on preventive and promotive care rather than curative care, on the revitalization of primary healthcare system supported by universal health insurance system. And not the least important is how to stimulate behavioral change at the community, household, and individual levels to instill the importance of good child rearing, individual behavior, and education. Why this is important? Because oftentimes we encounter situations such as stunting or wasting in children, in very, very small children, not because of poverty per se, poverty problem of the household or the parents per se. The household or the parents may be relatively well off, yeah? But the problem is because of lack of behavior or proper rearing, yeah? For the children by the mother. And then the next two slides show the rate of return to human capital investment. So I just copied, yeah, from Heckman, in which case it shows that highest returns are for early childhood education and rearing. And then also the importance of continuum of care, especially in the health care, but also in the education, yeah? Since the first 1,000 days of lives, yeah? And also in the early childhood. As a final note, let me reiterate the importance of the holistic and integrated approach in human capital investment, which is not only the responsibility of central government, but also, especially local government in this case, community, as well as household and individuals themselves, yeah? So all stakeholders' responsibility. Also on the importance of other SDGs goals simultaneously that impacting on the human capital development, such as the provision of basic infrastructure services, sustainable livelihoods, decent jobs, poverty and inequality reduction, which are essentially the core of SDGs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Yeah, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, we're coming to the country statement. And I would like to open the floor now, and in so doing, would like to point out that we have a long list of speakers this afternoon. Therefore, I urge all speakers to help maintain the discipline of 5 minutes time allocation, so that all delegations may have enough time to deliver their statements. I would also like to remind delegations that in case of a longer statement, you may deliver a summary version while the full text can be shared through the Commission website. At this time, I would like to invite the Honorable Deputy Prime Minister of Samoa, Ms. Finame Naomi Matafa, to deliver her remarks. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Dr. Shamshad Akhtar, the Executive Secretary of ESCAP, Her Excellency Dr. Hilda Heine, President of the Republic of Marshall Islands, His Excellency Bere Titenti Mamau, the President of Kiribati, Honorable Ministers, distinguished delegates. It's an honor to present Samoa's statement on the occasion of the 74th ESCAP Commission Ministerial Segment, which will discuss an issue that lies at the heart of our collective achievement of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, namely inequality. As the host country of the third UN High-Level Conference on Small Island Developing States in 2014, Samoa championed and continues to advocate for strengthened collective efforts to address inequality, particularly in the case of countries with special needs, such as small island states, landlocked least developed countries, and fragile states. For small island developing states, the Samoa pathway, considered to be the Sustainable Development Agenda for SIDS, emphasizes inclusive and equitable growth, reducing inequalities, promoting gender equality, and fostering equitable social development and inclusion. SIDS remain a special case for sustainable development in view of their unique and particular vulnerabilities. There is no doubting that the merits of the SIDS special case, defined largely by small size, extreme isolation, limited and narrow resource bases, geographic dispersion, diseconomies of scale, capacity limitations, susceptibility to climate change and natural disasters, and global crises. Mr. Chairman, the 2030 Agenda embraces all these elements, as do the Pacific's own regional guiding frameworks, such as the Framework for Pacific Regionalism, the Pacific Roadmap for Sustainable Development, and the Pacific Leaders' Gender Equality Declaration. This year, the United Nations has embarked on a review of the Samoa Pathways implementation, and I would like to thank ESCAP, together with DESA and ALS, for facilitating the Pacific Island region's input to this review. Tonga will host the sub-regional meeting in June, and Samoa will host the interregional meeting in early November. While the review has yet to draw conclusions, we know that to ensure these high-level commitments are not empty rhetoric, we must have concrete action and genuine and durable partnerships on the ground. There is a need to revisit the SIDS partnership framework and determine durability and level of commitments towards action and results. As small island states in the ESCAP family, we would therefore like to see better use of ESCAP's platforms to give due attention to the special development needs of our states, recognition for our sub-regional institutions, and efforts to better align the global and regional agenda to our sub-regional priorities and national development strategies. In this regard, the Samoa Pathway Midterm Review is not only timely, but should assist to guide ESCAP's attention to the special needs of its SIDS membership now and in the future, thus harnessing all the available resources and ensuring that we leave no one behind. Mr. Chairman, I'm very mindful of the time, so I will come to some concluding remarks. It would be remiss of me to forego this opportunity to comment on the UN reforms in relation to the achievement of the best possible outreach of assistance, advocacy, and representation in the blue Pacific continent that we live in. We would strongly urge to retain the resident coordinator officers in the Pacific. We have requested a more balanced spread of countries between at least 2 of the officers. Let us ensure that our isolation and geographical dispersion is narrowed through inequitable representation of organizations in our region. Capacity building for and investment in effective data collection and data desegregation are needed in order to identify whether groups are being left behind. Significant investments in and capacity building for data collection and analysis, especially in developing countries such as Samoa, are essential to be able to live up to commitment for desegregation of data, to truly measure what is needed, and to make policy adjustments so as to ensure that no one is left behind. In Samoa, there's emphasis on the importance of prioritization of those most in need or are most impacted by issues such as climate change and natural disasters. We acknowledge in this regard the efforts of ESCAP to introduce a generic tool that the national statistical officers can use to engage policymakers and enhance understanding and support for desegregated statistics in the context of Leave No One Behind and the 2030 Agenda. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Prime Minister of Samoa. Before I call the next speaker, let me apologize to all the speakers if I mispronounce your name in calling you. Let me now call on Mr. Salame Kamishet, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Lao People's Democratic Republic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Executive Secretary, distinguished delegates, On behalf of the Lao government, I would like to express our sincere congratulations to you, Mr. Chairman, on your election as chairman of the 74th sessions of UN ESCAP. I'm also confident that under your able leadership, you would be able to steer our session to a fruitful outcome. I would also like to thank and commend UN ESCAP, especially Madam Executive Secretary, for the contribution and the leadership that you steers the UN ESCAP. I would like to take this opportunity to express our deepest condolences to the government and the people of Indonesia over the recent terrorist attack in the city of Surabaya, which claimed the lives and the wounded innocent people. Mr. Chairperson, the recent report released by UN ESCAP demonstrates that Asia-Pacific has emerged as the world's fastest growing region over the past decades and registers a remarkable progress in reducing poverty, lifting close to 1 billion people out of extreme poverty. On the other hand, the dynamism has been accompanied by rising inequality, among others. The gap between the rich and the poor continues to persist and even getting wider in many countries and parts of the world. Such trend has posed significant challenges to the international community in realizing SDG within the set time frame. Moreover, inequality could cause potential impact on social order, peace, and stability, which are the prerequisites cause potential impact, prerequisite for a development agenda by 2030. Developing countries, in particular, countries with special needs such as LDCs, LLDCs, and SIDS, continue to require meaningful partnership and increased support and assistance from development partners. In this context, it is very timely that our session deliberates on the theme Inequality in the area of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Mr. Chairperson, the Lao government has adopted several policies and measures to address inequality and to narrow development gap in the country, as reflected in our current 5 years National Socio-Economic Development Plan 2016-2020, the 10 years Development Strategy 2016-2025 and Vision 2030 ultimately aim at graduating from LDC status and becoming a high middle-income countries by 2030. In addition, the rural development has been at the heart of the government's development strategy. As a result, considerable progress has been made, overall poverty rate has been decreased, and today stay at around 9%. Indicators across social sectors have been improving. The living standard of the Lao people has been gradually elevated. The recent review by the Committee for Development Policies in March this year on LDC status of the Lao PDR has been indicated that the Lao PDR has met GNI and HAI to graduate from LDC status for the first time reviewed. In order to maintain this positive momentum, the second round of the review in 2021, the Lao government will need to undertake further national policy reform and adopt cohesive measures to reassure the effectiveness in mobilizing resources to support the implementation of National Development Plan and prepare for a smooth transition for LDC's graduation. Mr. Chairman, the Lao government has attached great importance and is highly committed to the implementation of 2030 agenda. We would like to take this opportunity to inform the Commission that the Lao PDI has been selected among the 47 countries present to present its voluntary national review on the implementation of SDG at the high-level political forum to be held in New York later this year. As no nation can succeed alone without enhanced regional and international cooperation, Narrowing inequality within and among countries will remain an uphill task. In this regard, we believe that the role of regional and international organizations in addressing common challenges posed by income inequality and share vulnerability is utmost important. In the wake of an emerged negative trends of anti-globalization and protectionism, it is crucial to reaffirm the principle of multilateralism, under which disputes would be resolved through peaceful means and peaceful negotiation in an equal footing. Only through this we will be able to ensure our equality. In this regard, the Lao PDR welcomes all efforts undertaken by regional and sub-regional mechanisms, particularly within ASEAN, MRC, GMAs, the Belt and Road Initiative, among others, which in the long run would contribute to the long-term investment in infrastructure, in sustainable infrastructure development, strengthening the regional trade, economic cooperation, and connectivity. In addition, the establishment of the International Think Tank for LLDCs is a tangible result of multilateral cooperation and joint effort in addressing special needs of landlocked developing countries. The Lao PDR also recognizes the vital role played by science and technology and innovation as a fundamental means to support the accelerations of SDG implementation. In this regard, great efforts are needed to ensure that the sound and advanced technology is shared and transferred to developing countries. In conclusion, Mr. Chairperson, I would like to extend my heartfelt appreciations to all friendly countries, development partners, and international organizations for continued support and assistance extended to our countries in our effort for our national development goal. Since Madam Executive Secretary Akhtar will end her noble tenure of the office after the closure of this session, I would like to wish on behalf of the Lao government and the Lao people to thank her for the excellent leadership she has demonstrated at UN ESCAP and commend her for the great achievement she has made throughout the past years. And I also wish our session a great success. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Minister. Next, I call on His Excellency Mr. Faiz Siddiq Koya, Minister for Industry, Trade and Tourism, Fiji.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Chairman, very good afternoon to you and all the delegates. Mr. Chairman, firstly, I'd like to commend ESCAP for this very important theme of inequality in Asia and the Pacific in the era of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The theme this year has identified common issues for the Asia and Pacific region when working towards the goals of Agenda 2030. Reduction of inequality is a key pillar in our national development goals. The Fijian Constitution lays the foundation for inclusive growth, giving each and every Fijian social growth rights. Mr. Chairman, these legal rights in the Constitution are realized through a series of targeted policy interventions, initiatives, and incentives. The Fijian government over the past decade has made significant changes in the economic and socio-economic policies for the development of the rural and grassroots communities, empowering women and providing opportunities to the young and innovative minds. A national development plan, Fiji's 5-year and 20-year national development plan, sets out the platform to continue to transform Fiji into a unified, prosperous, inclusive, and progressive modern nation. The plan consists of 2 approaches, which are firstly the inclusive socio-economic development, which ensures that all socio-economic rights in the Constitution are realized. Inclusivity is at the center of growth and development, and the benefits of prosperity is spread as widely as possible to enhance social well-being of all Fijians. It ensures that no one should be left behind, regardless of geographical location, gender, ethnicity, physical and intellectual capacity and capability, and social and economic status. Secondly, transformational strategic thrust includes forward-looking, sustainable, and consistent policy shifts to expand our development frontier and support the vision of transforming Fiji. New and emerging growth sectors will be nurtured, connectivity within and to the outside world will be enhanced, new technologies embraced and productivity maximized, and human capital development will be accelerated, and green growth will be a key guiding principle in the implementation of this plan. In terms of affordable education, to have a modernized society and to reduce poverty and inequality, the Fijian government has invested significantly in providing education to all, such as free education from preschool to secondary school, and scholarships for toppers and tertiary loan schemes. The government has allocated 22% to the education sector in the 2017-2018 budget. And these initiatives have led to a 93% literacy rate, which is amongst the highest in the region. In terms of social protection, our social protection system continues to be strengthened to protect the elderly, women, and the disabled. The qualifying age for those eligible for social welfare has been gradually reduced to 65 years in 2017 and 2018 from 70 years in 2013, with recipients getting around $100 a month, which is a 70% increase over the 4 years. Fiji also has allowance for persons with disabilities at $90 a month and bus fare subsidies, and $50 a month monthly food voucher program for rural pregnant women. In addition, the employers are encouraged to employ people with disabilities and youth, school leavers and tertiary students, with an incentive of 150% to 300% tax deduction respectively on wages paid to disabled and youth employees. Other policies include free medicine, subsidized electricity and water for Fijians earning less than $30,000. The minimum tax threshold is $30,000. Fiscal duties on many consumable items have been reduced, making basic food items affordable. With respect to infrastructure, infrastructure is a crucial component to economic empowerment of all Fijians. Fiji has invested in trade and investment enabling infrastructure, such as roads to access markets, improvement in port facilities, to ensure our hub status, and increased ICT connectivity in rural and isolated regions within the country. Today, capital expenditure makes up 40% of the national budget as compared to 19% in the period 2000 to 2006. With SMEs, Mr. Chairman, as stated earlier, the Fijian government's approach to reducing inequality is to have targeted policies. Therefore, initiatives such as our micro and small business grant provides the smallest of small businesses a leg up. A minimum of $1,000 grant is provided for individuals to start their businesses or to further improve their existing businesses. The Fijian government is partnering with the Fiji Development Bank in this particular process. And this links the businesses with commercial banks and also graduates them from the informal to the formal sector. To date, we have supported over 18,900 MSMEs, of which 40% are women entrepreneurs. The program has a success rate of 80%, which is high by international standards. Other SME initiatives include government guarantees for financing, agriculture grants, business skills training, to name a few. Mr. Chairman, with respect to youth empowerment, we have a young population. Approximately 50% of the population is below the age of 27.5 years, and 69 altogether is below the age of 40. And therefore, we have a young entrepreneurship scheme in order to promote young entrepreneurs. The scheme is to assist our educated and talented Fijians between the ages of 18 to 30 with innovative and unique ideas. The scheme is to give our youth the confidence, and they can be job creators and not just job seekers. We in turn want Fiji to progress its status as the hub of the Pacific and become the innovation hub. Mr. Chairman, the above-mentioned consistent and pro-growth policies and initiatives, amongst others, have led Fiji to unprecedented levels of economic growth. Fiji has maintained a decade of positive growth over 4% in the last 5 years. And due to the inward-focused policies, we have been able to survive external shocks and the impact of natural disasters. The per capita income has doubled from $6,400 in 2006 to over $12,000 in 2017. The unemployment rate reached a 20-year low of 4%, and we have strong foreign reserves, and a debt to GDP is around 45.5%, which is the lowest in 15 years. Investments by domestic and foreign investors remain robust. In addition, the IMF Article 4 report that was released recently stated that Fiji's income inequality has declined in the last 15 years, and it's attributed to improvements in the social safety net and in employment. Mr. Chairman, in addition to reducing inequality, it is also crucial that all activities are undertaken in a sustainable manner. Sustainable development is the key pillar of our National Development Plan. Environmental degradation, natural disasters, and climate change are pressing issues for us, and all our policies are focused on sustainability and the future generations. Fiji's vulnerable position to natural disasters has only strengthened our resolve to build back better. As we have shown through our COP23 presidency, Fiji will continue its advocacy on reducing the impact of climate change by scaling up mitigation and adaptation efforts, which is the biggest contributor to inequality in this particular context, and access to climate finance. Mr. Chairman, I wish to thank you for allowing me this opportunity to outline some of the key policies and initiatives that have led to the reduction of inequality, especially as we all work towards achieving the 2030 agenda. I thank you, sir.
Thank you, Minister. Next, we have the Honorable Ralph Regenevo, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation, and External Trade of Vanuatu. You have the floor, sir.
Chairman, distinguished Presidents, Prime Ministers, Honourable Ministers, Executive Secretary, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Vanuatu welcomes the theme for this year's Commission session, Inequality in the Era of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We are pleased to participate and deliberate on this theme, and in particular to share our experience on how we have localised the SDGs by integrating them into our national planning framework. Vanuatu is particularly vulnerable to natural disasters. According to the Commonwealth Vulnerability Index, Vanuatu is ranked as the world's most vulnerable country, and the United States University's Risk Index identifies us as the most at-risk country in the world from natural hazards. Geographically, we are located along the so-called Pacific Ring of Fire, which places us at risk of volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, landslides, and tsunamis. Currently, we are in the process of evacuating and permanently resettling almost the entire population of one island, Ambai, due to ongoing heightened volcanic activity. Climate change has brought more frequent and more intense cyclones, and in 2015, Vanuatu was devastated by the Category 5 tropical cyclone Pam, which cost us 64% of our GDP. Climate change has also meant more frequent heavy rainfall events, which cause severe flooding and landslides, with massive damage to infrastructure, and, conversely, more protracted and severe droughts associated with more intense El Nino events. Sea level rise has forced people and communities to relocate. These natural phenomena have proven to be a real threat to sustainable development and can wipe out decades of development in a flash. We are endeavouring to climate-proof our livelihoods and societies, but to do so will cost us more than 100% of our GDP. We cannot do so overnight, and yet every day takes us closer to the next cyclone or drought. Climate change is relentless for us. It is not only unjust that we should pay the costs of loss and damage behind a climate change we did not cause. Mr. Chairman, this very inequality is a force behind climate change. As long as those who profit from the production of greenhouse gases are not those who suffer its most extreme consequences, climate change will accelerate. Soon the whole world will be affected, but soon it will be too late. Mr. Chairman, the effective solution to this lies in the polluter pays principle and the international solidarity envisaged by the 2013 Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage, later enshrined in the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement. But 5 years on from Warsaw and 2.5 years on from Paris, nothing has been done internationally to implement mechanisms to raise the amount of finance needed to offset the loss and damage of climate change for the most vulnerable. The resources currently available are no match for the costs. Resources to offset climate damage-related loss and damage need to be scaled up, and the perpetrators, not the victims, must pay. Serious consideration must be given to solutions like a climate damages tax on fossil fuel extraction or consumption, a climate levy on those sectors that contribute the most to climate change, and more impactful climate pricing schemes. These mechanisms could raise the hundreds of billions of dollars a year that are necessary, could help to reduce the production of greenhouse gases, and could be designed to respond in a more timely manner to immediate or slowly unfurling climate disasters. Vanuatu is currently listed by the UN as a least developed country, despite its high per capita gross national product, due to its status as the world's most vulnerable country. Our country is now entering a phase of moving towards graduation in 2020. Although, along with our fellow LDCs in the Pacific region, we are advocating that there should be a special SIDS category for small countries like Vanuatu that, although will graduate, still remain especially vulnerable to changes in the world's climate. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Vanuatu 2030, the People's Plan, is Vanuatu's National Sustainable Development Plan. The NSDP, as it is more commonly referred to, charts the country's vision and overarching policy framework for achieving a stable, sustainable, inclusive and prosperous Vanuatu within the next 15 years, and in doing so sets out the national priorities and context for the implementation of the global SDGs over the same period. Our national plan has 3 pillars: social, environment and economic, and 15 broad goals under these pillars. The 3 pillars are explicitly underpinned by a foundation which is our culture and traditions, or values, a distinctive way of looking at tackling inequality within our country by putting emphasis on traditional safeguards, forms of social organization and livelihoods that have for centuries provided the social security and inclusiveness for our people, as well as ecological integrity and environmental sustainability. Vanuatu is taking very seriously the call of Agenda 2030 for countries to contextualize and bring the SDGs into a national landscape that is relevant and appropriate for their needs. Through clearly defined policy areas that are also linked to annual national budgets, Vanuatu 2030 was designed with the aim of localizing and integrating the 122 SDG indicators and targets holistically within our own national 196 indicators. We are also localizing the regional indicators developed as part of the Pacific Roadmap for Sustainable Development into our national plan. We are in the process of finalizing our first annual report against our national plan, and we have also developed the National Indicators and SDGs database of indicators, which will further assist with our first voluntary UN report, scheduled for 2019. However, in order for us to make inroads on all our 15 broad goals, we need to ensure that we have good data, and baseline data continues to be a challenge for us. In our efforts to ensure that we are able to monitor and evaluate progress against our national plan and Agenda 2030, Vanuatu needs to conduct a national baseline survey, which will be critical in terms of getting the right information Vanuatu needs to meet national, regional and international reporting requirements. I am pleased to report, Mr. Chairman, that we have now secured the funds necessary to undertake this baseline survey, and it will commence in about 2 months' time. Continued support to the baseline survey for Vanuatu 2030 monitoring and evaluation framework presents an opportunity to dialogue with my government on the indicators identified therein, and in the process to strengthen the focus and relevance of this document. This is especially pertinent as together we proceed into a new development assistance framework with the Pacific UN system for another 5-year period. The NSDP is quite ambitious, but our government is committed to its implementation and monitoring and to reporting on its progress. As we are as SIDS, we will continue to work with our neighbours in the Pacific through existing regional mechanisms such as the Pacific Roadmap for Sustainable Development, which was endorsed by Pacific leaders in 2017 in Apia, Samoa. This and other regional mechanisms provide a platform for Pacific Island delegates to learn from multi-stakeholders how they are engaging and progressing with SDGs implementation, and also to share our experiences and challenges. The Pacific Roadmap also provides a pathway for a country such as ours, with a small population limited capacity, to report on the many other frameworks, such as the Samoa Pathway, Paris Agreement, Sendai Framework, Addis Ababa Action Plan, and the Global Partnerships for Development Effectiveness, to band together on common development issues. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to express our profound gratitude to our development partners, including ESCAP, for assisting in our quest for inclusive and sustainable development. But again, I must emphasize that their effort to assist in this cause must always be aligned to our national vision, values, goals, and policy objectives as articulated in the country's National Sustainable Development Plan. As we endeavour in this journey for sustainable development and in attaining the 2030 Agenda, we look to the world for support because we believe that while we are a small island nation in the Pacific Ocean, we are also part of the global heritage, and we all share a responsibility to help one another in our challenges to achieve common good. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Minister. Next, we have Professor Mr. Gupta Raj Patel, Vice Chair of National Planning Commission, Nepal. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, please allow me to sincerely congratulate Madam Chair and all Vice Chairs your election to respective positions of the 74th session of the Commission. I, on behalf of the Government of Nepal, my delegation and my own, would also like to express sincere thanks to the Royal Thai government and the people of the Thailand for their warm hospitality and support. Also, please allow me to appreciate and thank the UN ESCAP Secretariat for the excellent arrangements for this meeting. Equality is not only a goal, but also a means of progress. Sustainable use of natural resources is a must for survival and progress of this human civilization. The development of information technology has created unprecedented opportunities and challenges. One of the most significant challenges confronting all of us is to take steps towards economic prosperity in a way that reduces the inequality among the strata of society in our countries. In this context, the choice of inequality among the strata of society in our countries, in this context, the choice of inequality in the era of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development as the theme topic for era of the 2030 Agenda topic for this session is very appropriate and others a guidance for us to reduce this social evil. We need to focus on actions to make a qualitative difference in the lives of our people. Otherwise, our goal of generating, sharing, and sustaining prosperity for all will remain elusive without resources and true commitment for the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals. Mr. Chairman, this region has become more interdependent and interconnected now. This growing interdependence has unleashed both opportunities and challenges. Among the challenges, inequality remains as one of the most persistent issues in this region since a long time. Sub-regional cooperation between the countries in the same stage of development could help minimize the disparity. Moreover, technological innovations addressing the issues and opportunities of the third world economies would allow us to contribute to the global agenda of reducing inequality. We all have to work hard towards creating a conducive environment for the countries with special needs, including the other developing countries, to truly benefit from technological innovations, including frontier technology. The LDCs need reliable and sustainable financing, partnerships, and technological innovation to overcome their structural impediments to reduce poverty and inequality. The SDGs are not mutually exclusive. In order to address the key development challenges, we, the policymakers, should identify interrelationships and synergies between the 17 SDGs and 169 targets. The Constitution of Nepal has explicitly enunciated 31 different fundamental rights. The rights to equality, education, health, employment, food, housing, and the right against discrimination are directly related to reducing inequality in the nation. There are special rights for women, children, and senior citizens too. The government of Nepal has initiated several measures to reduce inequality. All provincial and local governments are empowered with financial and legislative powers to act on their own. More than 40% of the 40,000 elected representatives are women in 2017 elections. In line with the national policy, the public service is becoming more and more inclusive in recent years. The social security in terms of resources and coverage has been expanded significantly. Meanwhile, with the onset of identification of poor households and providing them with identity cards, there will be an opportunity for taking the targeted programs ahead. In Nepal, there has been significant progress towards poverty alleviation as a result of several efforts since the last 6 decades. Nepal experienced a sharp decline in poverty, about an average of 1 percentage point per annum in the last 2 decades. However, about 1/3 of the population is still below the national poverty line, and severe prevalence of inequality exists among certain social groups and strata of society. The intensity of inequality is relatively higher, especially among women, indigenous people, minorities, and vulnerable communities in the remote to rural areas. The progress was also disrupted due to the devastating earthquakes of 2015. A third of the population was affected, and 3% of the population was pushed below the poverty line. The post-flood recovery needs assessment estimates about 70 billion Nepalese rupees additional resources for recovery from the heavy flood occurrence in the southern part of the country last year. Similarly, the restructuring of the state into a federal system demands huge resources in the future as well. Mr. Chairman, Nepal is committed to working its best towards achieving the SDGs by or before 2030. We have undertaken various measures and have created enabling environment. The measures include the publication of SDG roadmap, which takes stock of Nepal's present development status and provides a roadmap to 2030, with intermediate milestones for 2019, 2022, 2025, and 2030. The monitoring framework in this roadmap aligns and updates national indicators with global ones. Besides, the UN Development Assistance Framework, UNDAF, for 2018-22 is aligned with national priorities and Nepal's target of becoming a middle-income country by 2030. For the realization of SDGs, we have created enabling environment in the country. The new Constitution of Nepal provides guiding principles and framework for inclusive socio-economic development. The government has started mainstreaming the SDGs into national planning and budgeting system. National Steering Committee presided over by the Prime Minister, Coordination Committee chaired by the Vice Chairperson of National Planning Commission, and thematic committees under the convenorship of NPC members are in place to guide SDG through plans and programs. The private sector, the cooperative sector, the civil society organizations, and our development partners are collaborating with the government on implementing the SDGs. With our concerted efforts, we are hopeful of achieving our goals within the stipulated time and realizing our long-term goal of making a prosperous Nepal. We have also realized that achieving SDGs is not easy task for countries like Nepal. The challenges include inadequate financial resources and access to technology, capacity development, horizontal and vertical coordination, and production of disaggregated data for monitoring. As we are in the formative stage of federal structure of the state, localization of SDGs, that is cascading national efforts to subnational levels and mainstreaming the SDG agenda into the state and local levels remains one of the major challenges. Despite a consensus among all of us here to reduce domestic and regional inequality, the diverse levels of development and different situations we are in imply that there is not a single and simple method for us to achieve our goals. The policy mechanism that the countries need to adopt could vary across regions, and each country should calibrate its own particular response. This further stresses the need for further cooperation within the region and beyond. We have a strong commitment for achieving our development objectives, but what we need here is the capacity, means, and resources to address the challenges, as well as vision, partnership, and collaboration, complemented by intensive investment. Finally, I wish the 74th session of the ESCAP full success. I thank you all.
Thank you, Professor. Next on the list is the Honorable Milton Ross Dubé, Member of Parliament, Nauru.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Dr. Shamshad Atka, Executive Secretary, Excellencies, distinguished members, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure in congratulating Her Excellency Dr. Hilda Heine, President of the Republic of Marshall Islands, as Chair of the 74th session of the Commission. Nauru gives its full support to you, Madam Chair, for a successful conference. Allow me to express my deepest gratitude to the host country, the government, and the people of Thailand for the kind hospitality extended to my delegation. I would like to acknowledge ESCAP Secretariat for organizing this 74th session of the Commission of Deliberate on the year's important theme, Inequality in the Era of the 2030 Agenda of Sustainable Development. Chair, inequality affects the three pillars of sustainable development, namely economic, social, and the environment sectors. For small island developing states, including Nauru, climate change and the natural disaster remains a contributing factor of intensifying inequality. The theme is timely as the region strives forward in implementing the 2030 Agenda on SDGs. However, addressing inequality would require partnership and recognition of vulnerable of Pacific small island states and the need for spatial preferential treatment in order to address these inequalities towards implementing the 2030 Agenda. Chair, the Pacific Island Forum leaders in September 2017 endorsed the Pacific Roadmap for Sustainable Development, which is the Pacific blueprint for coordinating support to the Pacific countries to deliver and account for the 2030 Agenda, including the Samoa Pathway, Paris Agreement, and the framework of the Pacific regionalism. Nauru acknowledges and thanks ESCAP for the support to the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat for the development of the Pacific Roadmap. Chair, it is vital for ESCAP to ensure that Nauru and the Pacific countries, as well as existing Pacific sub-regional organizations, are fully engaged in future Asia-Pacific reporting, including on SDGs, so we can improve the coverage of Pacific information in the Asia-Pacific reports. Chair, I want to conclude by saying that the Pacific is in danger of being left behind in the Asia-Pacific region because of its comparatively low capacity to bounce back from the now more frequent and intense natural disasters, but also due to limited access to financing, skilled labor, innovation, and technology. I urge ESCAP to continue its proactive role in seeking financing for peer-to-peer learning between the Pacific and the Asian countries, particularly in the areas of science, green technology, and ICT. Thank you very much, Chair, for this opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Now, next I call on His Excellency Mr. M.A. Manan, State Minister of Finance, Bangladesh. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. Chair, Honorable Ministers, Madam Executive Secretary, distinguished delegations, ladies and gentlemen. Greetings from the delegation of Bangladesh. Mr. Chair, this item under discussion now, inequality, is a global issue. It's a burning issue of our time. It's not an issue that concerns only my country, Bangladesh. As was in the presentation we heard earlier, particularly from the gentleman from France, young academic, I think, his figures are very stark. And we know it from other think tanks and from non-government organizations also. So this has to be addressed globally, we feel initially. In Asia, although last few years, decade or so, there has been tremendous growth, but including my country, of course. But also at the same time, it's painfully noted that inequality is rising. Although in Bangladesh, earlier, Gini coefficient was 32.1, which was fairly good by local standards, but there's a trend recently that it is increasing. So we are worried about that. Now, what to do? We know about the causes of, we know that it exists, the beast exists, but how do we face it? How do we address it? We are taught in our schools that at the time of initial growth, every country suffers from inequality. A time comes later, inequality falls. But you can't wait for until that time. You will die. So we have to address it immediately. Our country has tried to address it in our own way. What have we been able to do? First thing that we have tried to address is that we should have all rules and regulations, practices, policies of inclusive nature. We have to test every law in the country, how it impacts the poor, how it impacts the less advantaged. In that light, all our regulations and policies have been framed in that way. Particularly, the laws regarding labor wages, labor conditions, these will have to be addressed in a fair and positive manner so that the labor wage earners get their fair and proper wage. That we are practicing in our country, and we hope through ILO's support and through global compact on that, we'll be able to improve the situation there. In our country, how do we address again? We have a large package of special giveaways, sort of what we call social safety net programs. About 150 types of programs we have now in practice through which we address poor people, disadvantaged people, children, women, people with disabilities, people, lactating mothers, widows, this sort of people. So although we give small grants of money every month, even then it makes a lot of difference. It addresses the issue of poverty, and there is a perceptible change in my country, as you have noted, as we have told this gathering earlier this morning. Our poverty has fallen over the years, but still the last group, the hardcore poor, still they remain. Other thing that we have done is that we have extended free education for all, including primary and secondary levels. You might like to note that in my country, all children, primary education level, we give all the books free of cost on day one of the academic year, that is January 1 every year. We provide a cash grant to every child who regularly attends school, irrespective of the child's academic attainments. It's a small grant, but it makes a lot of difference. We would like to inform you that as a result, in Bangladesh, over the last few years, there are now more girls in schools, primary schools and secondary schools than boys, because the children, because the parents would like their children, particularly the poor parents would like their children to come to school, and apart from getting some literacy, they also get some cash grant. That helps a lot. We would like to share this with you. There are other ways also which are very well known to everyone. Progressive taxation. That is very difficult initially because taxation sometimes impacts on investment, corporate taxes, personal income taxes. But then again, we have to trudge a very careful way here so that while we get some cash for our current revenues, for our development programs, for our various welfare programs, at the same time we have to see that investment does not suffer. So here again, we move very carefully. Then there is question of female empowerment. That's very important, we have found. Bangladesh is one test case. Bangladesh is a case where women have been empowered in a very large extent. It is a Muslim-dominated country, very traditional. But we would like to inform you that in our RMG sector, which is the number one export sector, 4 out of every 5 people working are women. And in other sectors also, in the ICT, in processed food sectors, in pharmaceuticals, women are coming more and more in the wage labor sector. So that also helps in moving poverty a lot. Then there is the other thing that our government has found very useful is that we have, in the last 10 years particularly, we have extended electrification all over the country. By end of next year, 2019, our huge country of 160 million population will be fully covered with electricity. And that is going to provide a big, big boost to our poverty reduction programs. Then there is a question of better drinking water facilities and better sanitation for the rural folks. Rural people suffer a lot, their longevity suffers, their education suffers, their health suffers. So apart from providing some basic primary health care, we are providing clean drinking water through hand pumps Millions of hand pumps we are, with the help of our friends from abroad, with our own resources, we are providing hand pumps and better sanitation in the rural areas. Mr. Chair, what we need also, apart from this that we are doing with our limited resources, we need fair trade. We need global fair trade. We need not be, we face protectionism and we face a lot of tariff barriers which we think are unjust. We had a lot of hopes on WTO. We thought we'll have a rules-based, fair trading regime globally. But unfortunately, I must say that this is coming under attack recently, in the recent days. So there again, we would bring to the notice of everyone here that this is counterproductive. This is neither going to be good for the rich, is going to be very painful for the poor. Sometimes we are given duty-free access. It is sort of said that as if it is sort of a dole to us. When we have duty-free access, duty-free exports, not only we benefit, the consumers in the rich countries also benefit. They are getting cheaper goods at lower cost. So that is, they are maintaining a higher standard of living with lower wages that we provide in our country. So here is something that we should try to see that these poorer countries, low-income countries, what were called LDCs until recently, they need to be given fairer trade facilities and they need to be given duty-free access everywhere, all over, particularly in the rich north and western economies. Mr. Chair, we have to also provide access to various facilities that exist in the countries ourselves. We have to provide access to all our population. Education is one, healthcare is one, infrastructure provides a lot of access. Our rural population who live in the villages, if we provide good roads, bridges, then they come to the towns, growth centers, find work, and they can increase their income also, which also reduces their poverty. Last of all, Mr. Chair, that I would like to bring to your kind notice and to the notice of others is the great challenge of this climate change. Climate change is bringing miseries to our people particularly. Climate change affects the poor people more. They are less resilient. They can't recover from the shocks of climate change. Richer people can do sometimes, but poorer people have no way of coming back. So climate fund, climate cooperation, global climate change, this has to be fought globally together. ESCAP is one area where in this region, Asia Pacific, we can fight it, but going higher on to the UN level and to the global climate agreements, Paris agreements, etc., we have to protect those and see that climate changes can be addressed jointly and to the benefit of all of us. I thank once again ESCAP for providing us this opportunity today, and also over the years they have provided us a lot of support, and we wish to take this opportunity of thanking everyone here, particularly to the IGAs like World Bank, IMF, Asian Development Bank, who have assisted us in our development efforts, and to many countries, particularly our neighboring countries, which have provided us, particularly the Executive Secretary who is leaving her responsibility by the end of this year. We wish to thank her particularly for her great support to our country, and we wish her luck, and we wish to thank everyone here for giving us this time and to be able to present our country's case. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. Next I call His Excellency Mr. Kazuki Nakane, State Minister for Foreign Affairs, Japan.
I'll speak Japanese.
Please.
Prepare earphone. 議長、皆様、まずインドネシアのスラバヤで発生した爆弾事件等において亡くなられた方々、ご遺族の方々に心から哀悼の意を表し、負傷者の皆様のお見舞いを申し上げるとともに、インドネシア政府及びインドネシア国民に連帯の意を表します。私は3年前、外務政務官として第71回総会に主席代表として出席しました。この度、外務副大臣として、この場で再び挨拶できることを嬉しく思います。今次総会は、紛 不平等をテーマとし、持続可能な開発のための2030アジェンダの効果的実施のための法等について議論することになっています。各国内および各国間の不平等を是正することは、SDGs の目標10に位置づけられていますが、誰一人取り残さないを理念とする SDGs の17のすべてのゴールを達成するためには、不平等を是正し、包摂的な成長を実現するための取り組みを力強く進めていくことが重要だと考えています。ESCAP 域内では、これまでの著しい経済成長にもかかわらず、国内域内における社会経済的な発展の格差、すなわち不平等という成長を脅かし、個人がその恩恵を享受することを妨げる諸課題に直面しております。誰一人取り残されることなく、成長の果実が地域全体に行き渡ることを確保することが最重要課題です。その観点から、今次総会が不平等を是正するために、多国間主義とフロンティアテクノロジーに焦点を当てていることは、極めて時機を得たものと考えます。本日は我が国の不平等の是正に向けた取り組みについてご紹介いたします。日本は自由で開かれたインド太平洋戦略を推進しています。東南アジアは太平洋とインド洋をつなぐ結節点に位置しております。我が国はこの地域を中核に本戦略を推進することで、ESCAP 域内全体の平和と繁栄を促進していく考えです。不平等の是正に関わる我が国の取り組みについて、財政面の事例をご紹介したいと思います。財政面の不平等を縮小するためには、歳入・歳出両面からのアプローチが必要です。適切な税制とその執行は、累進課税により歳入面での不平等を縮小するとともに、不平等を歳出面から縮小することにもつながります。このことから、我が国は開発途上国の税の能力構築に必要な技術支援を行うとともに、税に関する共同のためのプラットフォームやアジア開発銀行に資金面で貢献をしています。また、税制の適切な執行に人材面でも貢献しており、我が国はアジア太平洋地域5カ国に JICA 長期専門家を派遣しているほか、我が国における受け入れ研修も実施しており、今後も途上国の税の能力構築支援に積極的に取り組む所存です。最後に、フロンティアテクノロジーについて触れたいと思います。科学技術、イノベーションは SDGs を達成するための重要な手段です。国連の SDGs のための STI に関するマルチステークホルダーのフォーラムに、2016年から毎年ニューヨークで開催されており、来月5日および6日に開催される第3回目のフォーラムは、我が国がメキシコとともに議長を務める予定です。我が国は SDGs 達成に向け、日本国内のみならず、世界においても、我が国の技術や知見を活用しつつ、積極的に貢献していきたいと思っております。ESCAP 域内において、誰一人取り残されずに、不平等を是正して、包摂的な成長を実現するために、ESCAP を一層活用していくことを強く期待しています。ご清聴ありがとうございました。
Thank you, Minister. Next, I call on His Excellency Mr. Mustafa Mastor, Minister of Economy, Afghanistan.
Mr. Chair, Madam Executive Secretary, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Allow me to begin by thanking the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific for inviting the Afghan delegation to this 74th session of the Commission, and also the government of Thailand for their outstanding hospitality. It is a great honor for me to be part of today's ministerial segment under the theme of inequality in the era of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. I would like to convey here our condolences to the people of Indonesia for the recent terrorist attack. Excellencies, no one could feel the pain better than us, Afghans, as we have these type of incidents on daily basis for more than 4 decades. Hope it is the last one. Fellow delegates, despite the fact that extreme poverty in Asia and the Pacific has declined, countries with higher inequality levels fail to lift millions of people out of poverty. On the other hand, decreasing inequality in other countries due to better fiscal and redistribution policies help millions of people come out of extreme poverty. Although the poverty rate has declined at the global level, it is still concentrated in countries affected by conflict. As a result of prolonged armed conflict, my country has one of the highest poverty rates of 54%. Food insecurity has risen from 30.1% to 44.6% in 5 years, meaning many more people are forced to sell their land, take their children out of school to work, or depend on food aid, the recent survey found. The latest Afghanistan Living Conditions Survey suggested a Gini index of 31%, which indicates a reduction in income inequality of 3 percentage points since 2012. Although there has been a slight decrease in inequality, it is not encouraging because the poverty rate has gone up simultaneously, indicating that people from the upper income levels are getting closer to the poverty line. Latest figures shows that 4 out of 5 jobs that were created before the political and security transition in 2014 were lost in 2017. Over the last 24 months, around 1.5 million Afghan refugees returned to the country, adding more pressure to the job market. Conflict is considered as the main cause for unemployment, particularly in the rural areas where around 1.4 million people internally displaced. Excellencies, despite the great challenges that face us, we are committed to leaving no one behind as part of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. However, tackling inequality in all its forms and poverty reduction efforts in Afghanistan require specific shifts in our policies and approaches. The last 15 years of reconstruction and development efforts taught us an important lesson, and that is, we failed to reduce poverty, create decent jobs, and sustain economic growth because we believed that public sector alone could address the problems. Therefore, I want to emphasize on the importance of building a strong partnership with all stakeholders, including private sector, civil society, UN agencies, and the citizens themselves, and focusing our policies more on those at the bottom of the income distribution to have the maximum impact. On the other hand, studies illustrate that inequality hampers growth. Research by OECD indicates that when income inequality rises, economic growth falls. This is consistent with ESCAP's finding that a 1 percentage point increase in the Gini coefficient reduces the GDP per capita, on average, by the $154 for the countries of our region. This is a large amount of money given the low per capita income in lower income countries. We also need to focus more on closing the gender gap by empowering women to involve in the politics, participate in the job market, and attain higher education. Excellencies, consistency in our programs and collaboration between UN agencies and financial institutions related to the SDG agenda as a whole and inequality in particular should be a must. In this regard, United Nations' role in implementing the 2030 Development Agenda in countries such as Afghanistan will be essential. While welcoming the One UN Agenda, we emphasize on larger and more active role of the ESCAP, other UN agencies, financial and development institutions in assisting us towards SDGs implementation, particularly in technical assistance. Ladies and gentlemen, in the last 15 years, we spent over $70 billion for reconstruction and development. But the existing challenges made the whole efforts inefficient and ineffective. Here, I would like to insist on modality of financing rather than the size of it. As I emphasized above, the evolving environment of today would be to continue to rethink our approaches towards the supporting SDGs in fragile and conflict-affected situations. This requires serious shifting away from the traditional way of investing in general programs towards more targeted approaches. Here, I would like to emphasize on the idea of peer learning between countries of the region to facilitate transfer of knowledge and best practices in implementing SDGs and addressing challenges that are common in developing country context to use resources wisely. Ladies and gentlemen, poverty is a failure of coordination between the government, the international community, civil society, and the private sector. It is time to work towards building a more comprehensive and stronger partnership between all stakeholders to increase accountability and responsiveness towards the poor population within our region. Excellencies, all what I emphasized was about efficiency, sustainability, consistency, accountability, and finally, partnership. These keywords will be easily remembered because the abbreviation of which becomes ESCAP 2. By saying this, on behalf of my government, I would like to thank Executive Secretary for her outstanding leadership in her tenure in advancing the socio-economic agenda of the region successfully. I would like to close my remarks with a statement from Anthony Atkinson that suggests inequality of outcome among today's generation is the source of the unfair advantage received by the next generation. If we are concerned about equality of opportunity tomorrow, we need to be concerned about inequality of outcome today. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Next, I call on Her Excellency Ms. Rosemary G. Edulion, Undersecretary, National Economic and Development Authority, Philippines.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Distinguished delegates, Madam Executive Secretary, I'm honored to share through this country statement the Philippines' contributions at reducing inequality. We have previously shared that we have mainstreamed the Agenda 2030 in our development plan. SDG 10 on reducing inequality is at the heart of our current Philippine development plan. The PDP 2017 to 2022 is the first of 4 medium-term development plans that is geared towards our long-term vision to be a prosperous nation where no one is poor, where our peoples live long and healthy lives, are smart and innovative, and live in a high-trust society. At the outset, we acknowledged that to achieve this long-term vision, we need to immediately address inequality. First, because it is the right thing to do. Second, because prosperity can only be achieved and sustained when a lot more are participating in the growth process. And third, because prosperity also requires a political constituency. And for us, what needs to be addressed is inequality of outcomes and opportunities. The current PDP espouses what we call the National Spatial Strategy, and this is based on a study of economic and demographic trends going back many years and projected into the future. It prescribes 3 principles for selecting development strategies. 1, agglomeration efficiency of the metropolitan centers. 2, connectivity between centers and settlements. And 3, reduction of vulnerability. Our infrastructure program subscribes to the NSS, whereby we have identified 4 metropolitan centers and several other regional and sub-regional centers. To address the inequality in the quantity and quality of infrastructure within settlements, especially those outside the centers, we launched the program called Assistance to Disadvantaged Municipalities, or the ADM. In the Philippines, Mr. Chair, the delivery of a number of public services has been devolved to the local government units. They are to be funded out of their revenue allotments and other sources. But for many of these LGUs, the funds are not enough to cover the infrastructure gap. The ADM provides supplementary funds coming from central government to be used for projects such as water system, evacuation facility, local access roads, water impounding, and sanitation and health facilities. In order to access the funds, the LGUs will need to demonstrate only adherence to good governance practices. The second pillar of the PDP is all about effecting inequality, reducing transformation. For production sectors, it is about expanding market opportunities and then increasing the access of the small farmers and fisherfolk in the case of the agriculture, and the MSMEs in the case of industry and services subsectors to these expanded market opportunities. And for individuals, it is about increasing their ability to participate in the growth process and reducing their vulnerabilities. Expanding market opportunities necessarily involves promoting trade in both goods and services. Hence, the Philippines actively participates in multilateral and regional fora that foster greater cooperation. To wit, these are the WTO, the ASEAN, the APEC, the UN processes, and other bilateral agreements. Currently, the Philippines is considering participating in a project to develop the work program on MSME development for the proposed free trade area of the Asia Pacific. This is an APEC initiative. We are also committed to the ASEAN Framework Agreement on Services. We have been working closely with our ASEAN neighbors in developing the ASEAN Qualification Reference Framework, which is a translation device to enable comparisons of qualifications across participating ASEAN countries. This intends to optimize opportunities for our professionals who consider working abroad as their path towards achieving human development for themselves and their family. And also for this reason, and to include all other migrants, we have been actively participating in the negotiations towards the Global Compact on Migration. We also tap development partners in building our resilience to natural calamities. In addition to projects designed to mitigate the impact of natural hazards, most of which are funded out of our own funds, we have availed of disaster risk resilience financing. The latter is to ensure that we do not suffer undue fiscal stress when we undertake rehabilitation and reconstruction in the aftermath of natural calamities. Mr. Chair, the Philippines is also investing heavily in human capital. In addition to free primary and secondary education, we have undertaken massive reforms to improve the quality of education. And beginning the last school year, we have already provided free tertiary education in our state universities and colleges. We have also increased the budget for student assistance for those enrolled in private universities and colleges. At the same time, we are aware that certain groups require special assistance, like infants, children, women, the elderly, indigenous peoples, and differently abled persons. We are particularly concerned about the children in poor families, and for them, we have been implementing and just recently enhanced the Conditional Cash Transfer Program. This program provides cash transfers to identified beneficiaries on the condition that family members who are of school age attend school, and children and pregnant and lactating mothers seek health care. To fund all this, and for all other purposes, we have recently reformed our tax policies to make it fair, equitable, and the tax administration simpler. Our reforms in sin taxes have been providing ample resources to fund our health programs at the same time that we have reduced the consumption behind these harmful goods. Recently, we have expanded the coverage of these sin taxes to include sugar-sweetened beverages in the hope of also curbing the incidence of diabetes in the country. While undertaking reforms, we are mindful that there could be unintended consequences on the poor and disadvantaged sectors. So with the tax reform, we expect a temporary increase in inflation. And for this reason, we have also put in place an unconditional cash transfer program for a limited time of 3 years for the bottom 50% of families to cover their temporary loss in purchasing power resulting from the tax reform. Simultaneously, we are working to institute robust solutions to our logistics problem, including strategic trade policy. We're not yet done with our tax reforms, but this is the discipline that we have committed to, that before any reform, we need to determine clearly how this would affect the poor and those who are in the marginalized sectors, and we need to put in place the mechanism, the measures to make sure that these are mitigated. As you can see, the Philippines is one with the UN member countries who put great emphasis on reducing inequality. Indeed, we know that SDG 10 is at the core of the goals since it operationalizes the principle of leaving no one behind. More importantly for us, it is the key to attaining our long-term vision. We thank the UN ESCAP for making inequality the focus of this year's Commission session. As UN ESCAP member states, the challenge for us is to look outside of our silos and beyond our borders to craft solutions to address the interconnected nature of inequality. And I would like to acknowledge the crucial role of the Madam Executive Secretary in promoting this consciousness. At the same time, the ESCAP, through Madam Executive Secretary, has made us aware of the other issues like climate change, inclusive finance, financing for development, and others, especially as they affect the LDCs, the LLDCs, and the SEEDs. Indeed, the UN ESCAP and its member states, like the SDGs, are interconnected, and the solutions that we craft must be fully aware of this interconnectedness. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Undersecretary. And now I call on His Excellency Mr. Mukhtar Teluparte, First Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Kazakhstan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, on behalf of the government of the Republic of Kazakhstan, I would like to express our gratitude to the Secretariat of UNESCAP for the excellent arrangement of the session. The topic we are discussing at this session is highly relevant. Despite the overall progress of countries around the world towards the Sustainable Development Goals, inequality is one of the significant obstacles in this direction. Social inequality is perhaps the most common form of this phenomenon. Inequality within a society has great potential to be a source of instability. Without social justice, it's impossible to achieve unity in society and accordingly a sustainable growth. And Kazakhstan consistently pays a specific attention to this issue. On March 5th, in this recent nation address, President Nursultan Nazarbayev announced what he called 5 social initiatives, unprecedented for Kazakhstan measures to support vulnerable population. These are including the tax breaks for low-income workers, greater access to education, increased access to low-cost mortgages, and expanded business microloans, as well as increased personal access to natural gas. The primary responsibility for the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals rests with national governments. At the same time, there is an inequality also between states. A number of countries in the region are facing issues of restricted access to natural resources, transportation routes, or high level of the disaster risk. In that sense, for the purpose of inclusive and sustainable development, it's important to consolidate mutual efforts to strengthen interaction in solving the inequality problem. In this regard, Kazakhstan believes that transport connectivity, transfer of technologies, and economic integration projects are very helpful tools to bridge the obstacle of inequality. Kazakhstan, being the largest landlocked country in the world, attaches great importance to the Vienna Programme of Action. Kazakhstan is focused on addressing challenges of isolation from global market and limited access to international trade that are among major obstacles on our way to sustainable development. One of the good examples of such cooperation is the integration of Kazakhstan's Nurluzhol program and Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. Both projects seek to create conditions for trade facilitation, transit transportation, and development of reliable transport and logistic infrastructure. Therefore, integration of these projects is creating a multiplying effect for the development of a wide range of industries and unimpeded trade across the Eurasian continent. It also involves a significant expansion of bilateral cooperation in investment, transportation, and tourism. Today, we are making great efforts to maximize the transit potential of Kazakhstan. A number of infrastructure projects are being implemented in the country on the road, railway, and aviation industries. The implementation of transport projects will make it possible to fully tap the potential of the main transit routes passing through Kazakhstan, such as Western Europe, Western China, Russia and Central Asia, and China and Iran. Mr. Chairman, Kazakhstan is determined to continue contributing to sustainable development. Among the practical steps has been made is hosting the International Specialized Exhibition Expo 2017 on the theme Future Energy in Astana last year. Exhibition was very successful. It gathered participants from 115 countries and 22 international organizations. About 4 million people visited the site. Kazakhstan pays great attention to infrastructure development and capacity building, and the exhibition site is using for launching several new large-scale projects. One of them, the International Center for Green Technologies Development and Investment Projects, was established. The center will also create opportunities to partnership and collaboration with other countries, which will be beneficial not only for Kazakhstan but for the region as well. Kazakhstan is working on the implementation of the National Plan of Transition to Green Economy. We are also committed to supporting sustainable development through our initiative Green Bridge Partnership Program. Kazakhstan is closely working with ESCAP on green economy. Together with ESCAP, Kazakhstan launched a project to install biogas systems in small island developing states of the Pacific region. Kazakhstan is planning further to continue supporting ESCAP project on climate change and renewable energy solution in the region, with a key focus on helping Pacific Island countries to participate more actively in international climate change meetings. With the view to generate innovation and develop technology, we once again put forward the proposal of the President of Kazakhstan to all member states to allocate 1% of their defense budget to the specific fund of United Nations for Sustainable Development Goals. And I thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have His Excellency Mr. Wu Set-hong, Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Planning and Finance, Myanmar.
Mr. Chairman, Executive Secretary Dr. Shamshad Akhtar, and Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, on behalf of the Government of the Republic of the Union of Myanmar, I would like to convey my most sincere appreciations to the Government of the Kingdom of Thailand, to the Thai people, and especially to ESCAP for the excellent preparations and very warm hospitality extended to us and to all the delegates here today. Myanmar fully recognizes the important contributions the Asian-Pacific collaborations can and it's making towards the promotion and achievement of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And in this regards, we note the significant role being played by ESCAP and also the contribution the Commission has made to improving prosperity within our region. Mr. Chairman, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we have come together at a very most auspicious moment, a moment in time that has been described by some as synchronized economic recovery. Because we used to have 1997 Asian financial crisis, but at that time it didn't really take a long time for many Asian countries to get recovered. But this time in 2008 global economic crisis, it has taken quite some time for many countries to recover. But however, although some of the countries are still struggling, particularly to fight against this deflation or lowflations in the countries like many European countries, but we have started seeing recovery, the global recovery in many countries and in many areas. So we have approached 10-year mark following the most severe financial crisis faced since the Great Depression of the 1930s. A broad-based and global economic upswing is now underway. So I'm not the only one who is a bit being optimistic today. And the Asian Development Bank also last month has raised its 2018 economic growth estimate for developing Asia to as high as 6%. But however, we need to be reminded to ourselves to get prepared for any possible consequences that may fall upon us as a result of the policy measures and policy changes in some other countries, particularly in the area of monetary policy. I'm talking about interest rate hikes and balance sheet normalizations and trade policies and some rising sense of protectionism policies. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, our region has much to be proud of in terms of our contributions to reduced inequality between countries throughout the previous decades. In 1990, our region was almost entirely unrepresented within top global income groups. Indeed, many of our people instead found themselves in the bottom half of the global income distribution. But since that time, through the regional cooperations and integrations into the global economy, the securing of peace and the continued spread of democratic traditions and norms, including what we in Myanmar refer to as our own triple transition, we have seen growth within our region skyrocket, and we have seen poverty plummet. So in consideration to this context, the challenge which Myanmar faces, and indeed the challenge which each of us most now address, is how can we take full advantage of this global and regional economic upturn. So ladies and gentlemen, our economic growth is expected to exceed 7% over the medium term. We used to have about 8 or 8.5% in the past consecutive years. But this rapid economic growth was actually followed by inflation. So we used to have about double-digit inflations about a couple of years, so we had to start tightening our monetary policy and fiscal policy. And as a result of this monetary tightening and fiscal tightening, our inflation has stabilized within 2 years to about 5% now. So since the inflation has been stabilized, our economic growth also has been stabilized to about 6%. Now it's being bounced back, and then we are expecting our economic growth to be over 7% in the medium term. So in Myanmar have an incredible opportunity to channel its fruits, born forth from the sustained economic growth, and to channel these towards our key development priorities, reducing inequality, eradicating poverty, and creating decent jobs for all, to name but a few. So amongst a number of headline successes, we have seen trade flows double, we have witnessed foreign investment quadruple, and per capita income has risen by 50%. The poverty rate also has fallen, from over 40% to only about 26% today. The chronic malnutrition in children, considered one of the best indicators for long-term human capital development, also has fallen from 35 to 29%. However, amidst this success, we must take care to ensure that the headlines do not overshadow rising levels of inequality or the lived experience of our people who remains below the poverty line or hovering close to it. Mr. Chairman, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, by having the SDGs and SDG targets fully localized and our own regional commitments that we have committed to in our GMS and AEC, ASEAN Economic Community, and many our regional commitments mainstreamed. And we have already developed the Myanmar Sustainable Development Plans, we call it MSDP. So our MSDP contains a set of clear, coherent, and reinforcing strategies and action plans that will take us forward towards the SDG achievements. Our MSDB actually contains 5 goals. So the first goal is particularly about peace and national reconciliation. So it is something to do with political stability. The second goal is particularly about macroeconomic management. So it is something to do with economic stability. So the third goal is particularly about private sector growth and job creation. So the fourth goal is something to do with social development and human resources development. But the final goal, the fifth goal, is something to do with environmental protections and natural resources management. And from these 5 goals, we have already drafted more than 200 action plans, and these action plans are further broken down into many implementable projects and programs already. So linked to this is our new PIP, that is, we call it the Public Investment Program, but in a sexier word, we call it Project Bank, which will include a list of costed and prioritized national development projects to be implemented in a short and medium term. I would like to stress that these documents will be critical to ensuring that all our projects and initiatives, regardless of their source of financing, are properly linked and directed towards the same shared goals. This PIP in particular will play a central role in the government's plan to significantly scale up investment in the infrastructure and human capital, will contribute to boosting more inclusive growth, stimulating job creation, and addressing subnational disparities. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, Myanmar remains committed to leaving no one behind as we continue to make progress with a renewed and stronger sense of purpose and resolve to do our best to achieve peace and prosperity for our country with the support and cooperation of our people and of our friends around our region and around the globe. With that, we reaffirm you all our commitment and obligations to this effort. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. Now, I would like to call upon His Excellency Mr. Sonam Chong, Foreign Secretary, Bhutan.
Honorable Chair, Madam Executive Secretary, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, good afternoon. At the outset, I would like to congratulate Her Excellency Madam Hilda C. Hein, the Honorable President of the Marshall Islands, on her election as the chair of the 74th session of the Commission. I also take the opportunity to express the appreciation of my government to Her Excellency Madam Shamshad Akhtar, the Executive Secretary of ESCAP, and her dedicated team on the good work that ESCAP is doing for promoting regional cooperation in the Asia-Pacific region. Before proceeding further, I would like to join the other delegates in expressing the condolences of my delegation to the people of Indonesia on the horrific tragedy they have just suffered. Mr. Chair, on the theme for the current session of the Commission, the ESCAP report on inequality in our region makes sober reading. It finds that were it not for inequality, an additional 140 million people could have been lifted from abject poverty. Sadly, this is only a part of the story, for societal inequality is the root cause of the many ills that afflict our world. This is why economic growth on its own will not address inequality. To leave no one behind and to reach the furthest behind first, we need to make our development policies and interventions as inclusive as possible. We are heartened that the United Nations and its member states are earnestly committed to implementing the Sustainable Development Goals as enshrined in Agenda 2030. In this regard, I commend ESCAP for taking the leadership role in coming up with the Asia-Pacific Regional Roadmap for its implementation in our vast and diverse region. Mr. Chair, Bhutan will be completing its 11th five-year socio-economic development plan by the end of June this year. During the plan period, we have, under the dynamic leadership of our King, the government, and the hard work of the people, made tremendous progress in reducing poverty and greatly improved the access of our people to basic social and economic services. In terms of social development and providing equal access to opportunities, the Royal Government continues to make steady progress with nearly 100% access to electricity, over 90% health coverage, 95% school enrollment ratio, 99.5% access to safe drinking water, and 92% having access to improved sanitation. Banking and financial inclusion has been improved with the government's initiative to open banks in all districts and through the recently launched priority sector lending scheme for agriculture and small farmers. The minimum lending rate policy of the royal government authorities has further improved access to low-cost finance. Indeed, promoting the welfare and happiness of our people has been the consistent development goals of our political leadership led by our enlightened monarchs. Excellencies, like 10 other LDCs from the region, Bhutan is now poised to graduate from an LDC to a low-middle income country status shortly. However, we still face serious and daunting challenges in sustaining the prosperity we have achieved, for we are still vulnerable largely due to economic and climate change-related vulnerabilities. Additionally, though we have reduced poverty levels from 12 to under 8% over the last 5 years, income inequality seems to have slightly increased if we go by the initial Gini coefficient data of the latest socio-economic survey of Bhutan. Moreover, we are concerned that rural income has not kept pace with the rise in urban income, though most Bhutanese still live in the countryside. Poverty in Bhutan is mainly a rural phenomenon, with 93% of the poor in Bhutan living in the rural areas. Although we have achieved 100% electrification recently, biofuel consumption rate is still 43.9%, which is again mostly in the rural areas. Fiber optics has reached all 20 districts and 201 sub-districts, yet only 30% of the population has access to internet. On the other hand, we find that though national unemployment rate is around 3%, urban unemployment is around 12%, of which educated unemployed youth make a large number. Now that Bhutan has made progress in most areas of improving the basic needs of our people, the thrust of our forthcoming 12th five-year plan, which starts from 1st July 2018, will be on consolidating and ensuring that the fruits of our development achievements percolate to the poorest and the remotest parts of the region. In this regard, one of the key programs for reducing poverty and inequality will be the targeted poverty reduction programs and the further decentralization of our development programs to the district and block levels through transfer of financial and administrative powers. We all recognize that if inequality is to be comprehensively addressed, we have to go beyond reducing income deprivation to ensuring that there is transparency in action, just governance, and accountability of the service providers, among others. Indeed, these are the other important areas that our government will be addressing during the forthcoming five-year plan. Needless to state, national efforts need to be supplemented by bilateral, regional, and international assistance. In this regard, I express our sincere appreciation to our development partners and friends and look forward to their continued goodwill and support. Finally, I take this opportunity to once again reiterate our appreciation to the successful steering of ESCAP by Madam Shamshad Akhtar and wish her the best in her future endeavors. Thank you and Tashidele.
Thank you, Foreign Secretary. Next, I call on our host country and its representative, Ms. Kachina Petroshoki, Director General and Permanent Representative, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Thailand. You have the floor, ma'am.
Mr. Chair, Madam Executive Secretary, distinguished delegates, my Foreign Minister has spoken this morning, so I will keep my statement short. Our challenge is clear. If we are going to achieve the SDGs by 2030, we need effective strategies to address inequality in all dimensions. We need everyone to be on board, and we need to think out of the box. On effective strategies, we need to mainstream addressing inequality as part of our national agenda. For Thailand, our 20-year national strategy frameworks lays out a comprehensive structure that fosters opportunities for equality and inclusiveness. While the 12 National Economic and Social Development Plan envisage a social system and structure that is just and capable of reducing social disparity, with special emphasis on helping low-income earners. On partnership and stakeholder engagement, we need to focus more on bringing everyone on board. We need to do away with the deep mistrust between governments and civil society, creating a working culture that people at the grassroots level can co-create policies. We need the private sector to step up their social responsibility and promote responsible investment and businesses, not as a charity, but as a responsibility. We also need the academia, universities, and think tanks to reach out to communities and help them to achieve SDGs based on their own local wisdom and mixing it with scientific and technological tools and application. Lastly, we need to think out of the box. It is a true challenge how we can break legal, bureaucratic, and financial constraints to make change. So we need partners and friends to open up our vision and to broaden our horizon of possibilities. This is why regional connectivity and cooperation is of utmost importance. My delegation looks to the ESCAP to step up efforts to assist countries in this region to overcome the inequality challenge. Finally, I take this opportunity to also thank Madam Shamshad Akhtar, Executive Secretary, for her hard work, her dedication, and outstanding services to member states over the past 4 years. We wish you all the best in your future endeavors, Executive Secretary, and we'll miss you. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Director General and Permanent Representative. Now I call on Her Excellency Mrs. Shinuka Siniwarate, Ambassador and Permanent Representative, Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Chair. Madam Executive Secretary of ESCAP, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I extend Sri Lanka's appreciation to Madam Shamshad Akhtar, Executive Secretary of ESCAP, and her team for organizing this conference in an efficient and effective manner. This Commission session is tinged with sadness following Madam Shamshad's announcement of her relinquishing the exalted seat of ESCAP. Her untiring efforts to achieve the best for the region would be a legacy she leaves. Her accessibility to us member states has been invaluable. She will be sadly missed, and on behalf of Sri Lanka, I take this opportunity to thank her for the ready cooperation and extend the very best in her future endeavors. I congratulate Madam Chair on her election. Undoubtedly, with her experience and skill, our discussions will be conducted to a fruitful conclusion. The Sri Lanka delegation is also thankful to the Thai government for the warm hospitality afforded. I take this opportunity to record Sri Lanka's deep condolences to Indonesia on the horrific attacks during the last 2 days. Mr. Chair, while Sri Lanka and ESCAP have engaged in steady cooperation in addressing various developmental concerns, the adoption of the 2030 Agenda has brought to the table new challenges to be addressed nationally and regionally. Sri Lanka notes with appreciation the complementary role played by ESCAP in addressing the related issues in the region through studies, capacity building, stakeholder engagement, etc. In this context, the theme of this session, Inequality in the Era of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, focusing primarily on the inequality of income and opportunities, is timely and apt. In fact, Sri Lanka is scheduled to present its first voluntary national review at the high-level political forum to be held in New York in July this year. I wish to record that Sri Lanka's processes in implementation of the SDGs and VNR have received commendable support from ESCAP together with the UN country team in Colombo, both technically and financially. This support has been invaluable in developing a stakeholder engagement plan based on the IAP2 framework and will continue to be a foundation in further strengthening the stakeholder engagement process through novel approaches such as online platforms. Mr. Chair, inequality in income is entwined with inequality in opportunities and access to services. Therefore, in order to ensure that the dividends of growth are enjoyed by all and that no one is left behind, countries need to combat inequalities in income distribution. SDG 1 on eradicating poverty is closely related to removing disparities in the receipts of development benefits. In addition, achieving SDG 8 on providing decent work for all is essential in addressing the issue of inequality in income as well as of opportunities. At present, Sri Lanka is focusing on ways to overcome its long-term strategic and structural development challenges as it strives to transition to an upper middle income country while concertedly further promoting good governance and transparency. Sri Lanka has achieved considerable economic progress resulting in the improvement in annual per capita income to US dollars 4,065 in 2017, and also the poverty headcount reduced to 4.1% in 2016. However, in terms of inequalities of income and opportunities, Sri Lanka continues to face barriers in the form of regional disparities within the island in access to basic services and economic opportunities. Poverty pockets too persist at regional level. Universal free access to education and health have played a significant role in mitigating the effect of income inequality on the poorer segments of society. Nevertheless, Mr. Chair, there have been signs of improvement. For Sri Lanka, the Gini index indicates that inequality has lessened from 2009 to 2016. The household income per capita of the lower 40% segment has grown by 10.5% during the same period compared to the national average of 5.8%. According to recent estimates, the proportion of the country living below 50% of the national median income is 13.5%, with only slight variations among different gender and age groups. In addition, the health and education sectors of Sri Lanka are ranked almost on par with developed countries. To address the disparities at regional level, the government is focused on shifting development efforts to emerging areas with targeted interventions identifying needs as well as development potentials of different parts of the country. Sri Lanka has also been successful in achieving gender parity in education and access to basic services. However, there are sectors in which gender disparities may be observed. For example, although our unemployment rate stands at the low rate of 4.2%, female labor force participation is only 32%. This is being addressed concertedly as free access to education has resulted in an educated female populace whose capacities are required for the nation's development. Recognizing this situation, the government has launched training programs and introduced flexible regulations to facilitate women to balance work outside the home with responsibilities related to families. Mr. Chair, another area in which gender inequalities are apparent in Sri Lanka is political participation. Although women possess the right to exercise their vote and participate in political activities since 1931, the representation of women in parliament has always been below 6% in comparison to an 18% average in other South Asian countries. In this regard, the government has focused on increasing female political participation with an amendment to local electoral law in 2016 to reserve 25% of all seats for women, which is in the throes of being implemented. Sri Lanka is therefore focused on adopting policies, especially fiscal, wage, and social protection, to progressively achieve greater equality. For instance, with regard to fiscal reform, it is aimed to change the ratio of direct to indirect taxation from the current 20/80 to 40/60 in the medium term, as identified through the Vision 2025, the main economic policy document of the government. Mr. Chair, in the context of leaving no one behind, the Sri Lanka government has also recognized the importance of improving access to the specially abled to basic services and income-generating opportunities. In this context, the proposed resolution towards disability-inclusive sustainable development is welcomed by Sri Lanka. It is the intention of the government to address inequality affecting all segments of society to ensure the best access of all citizens to development dividends. As such, Sri Lanka also welcomes the proposal to strengthen regional cooperation to tackle inequality in all its forms in the Asia and Pacific through the related proposed resolution which encompasses the theme of this Commission session. Mr. Chair, in view of the role of trade in the development of countries, it has been recognized that inequalities are exacerbated by the lack of connection to the global economy. Sri Lanka's level of integration with the world's economy could be better in comparison to many emerging economies due to factors such as lack of diversification of exports and markets and links to the global value chains, as well as less than satisfactory trade facilitation. The government recognizes the need to improve our systems and enhance investor confidence, towards which steps are being taken. Sri Lanka aspires to establish a new investment framework which will ensure policy coherence and consistency and streamline procedures to improve the overall business climate and attract FDIs. Sri Lanka welcomes the support of ESCAP in this endeavor. Mr. Chair, in conclusion, I emphasize that Sri Lanka will serve as an equal partner in our journey to achieve the 2030 agenda and looks forward to concerted cooperation between all stakeholders towards this end. I wish all delegations fruitful deliberations geared towards action-oriented outcomes from the current Commission session. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador and Permanent Representative from Sri Lanka. Now I call upon our final speaker for this afternoon, His Excellency Mr. Moon Shon Mo, Ambassador and Permanent Representative, Democratic People's Republic of Korea. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. On behalf of the delegation of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, I hope this session will be successful and also appreciate the efforts made by Dr. Shamshad Akhtar, Executive Secretary of ESCAP, and the Secretariat for the successful opening of this session. The 73rd session of the ESCAP, held last year, adopted the regional roadmap for implementing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in Asia and the Pacific and identified the priorities for it. At the 5th Asia-Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development held in March this year, the regional countries have expressed their willingness to make a close cooperation to build a resilient and sustainable society that left no one behind by overcoming challenges faced in achieving the SDGs. Mr. Chairperson, there has been a significant progress last year in the ESCAP activities for implementing the priority objectives reflected in regional roadmap. However, I cannot but to mention that there are still few challenges in SDGs implementation by member states. My delegation appreciates the ESCAP's timely response for selecting this session's theme topic, Inequality in the Era of the 2030 Agenda, and providing opportunities for a solution, and would like to make a statement on our principled viewpoint on it. First, a peaceful environment should be established for the sustainable development in the Asia-Pacific region. Asia and the Pacific region have huge human resources and inexhaustible natural resources, but not fully exerting its potential to the maximum due to the unstable situation prevailing in the region. We take a note to the opening remarks by Dr. Shamshad Akhtar at both senior and ministerial level segments, in which she appreciated the progress towards the peace development on the Korean Peninsula, with an emphasis that sustained peace is a prerequisite of sustainable development. The situation on the Korean Peninsula is moving forward to peace and reconciliation thanks to the bold determination by Comrade Kim Jong-un, Chairman of State Affairs Commission of the DPRK, and now the whole world is viewing the North-South Summit as a great event that ensuring peace and security not only in the Korean Peninsula, but also in Northeast Asia and other parts of the world, with a great impact on the world political trend. The DPRK government will continuously extend all efforts to secure peace and stability in the region by coping with challenges and various unprecedented and inhumane sanctions imposed on the country by specific countries with strong self-reliance will and spirit to build a socialist powerful nation at any cost. Second, due attention should be given to take reliable measures to get rid of all all inequalities hindering the smooth implementation of SDGs. For the last decades, Asia and Pacific region has recorded a rapid economic growth, but it provided benefits to only 1/10 of population in the region, and the gap between the rich and the poor still remains unreduced. Transfer of technologies hindered and thus created huge difference between the developed and developing countries in the region. In coordinating economic cooperation and integration of Asia and the Pacific region, the ESCAP should give priorities to the economic cooperation and exchanges among member states and encourage South-South cooperation in the area of science and technology. The coordinated efforts should also be made to eliminate protectionism still rampant in the area of trade and investment, establish an international economic order in an equitable and fair manner, and create an environment for investment conducive to SDGs achievement by the developing countries. Mr. Chairperson, today the entire Korean people are waging a vigorous struggle to consolidate the independence and future character of the economy and improve people's living standard under the wise leadership of Comrade Kim Jong-un, Chairman of the State Affairs Commission of the DPRK, and at the historic 7th Congress of the Workers' Party of Korea that took place on May 2016, he has set forward 5-year strategy of national and economic development between 2016 to 2020, aiming at revitalizing all fields of national economy and ensuring its sustainable development. And recently in April at the plenary meeting of the party, the party's strategic line to concentrate all efforts on socialist economic construction based on the spirit of self-reliance has been adopted. Its immediate goal is to realize the new strategic line by keeping production going at full capacity at all industrial establishments and reap a rich harvest in agriculture during the period of carrying out 5-year strategy for national economic development, whilst the long-term goal is to put the national economy on juche, modern, IT and scientific basis and provide all people with a fluent and highly civilized life. The DPRK government is striving to increase its national investment in the scientific and technological sector and transform the economic structure into science and technology-oriented economy to meet the requirement of an era of a knowledge economy by defining the scientific and technological development as the breakthrough for implementing this 5-year strategy. The government is also taking measures to localize raw materials and equipment for the national economic development, transform the national economy into energy-saving economy, and expand the scope of the use renewable energy by increasing electricity production by wind power, biomass, and solar energy. The government is also introducing the scientific agricultural methods with the comprehensive mechanization of the agriculture and pushing forward the forestation and forest conservation altogether by establishing modern tree sapling bases across the country. Amid of the most difficult challenges, the government continues to provide universal free medical care and 12-year compulsory and free education. As the 5-year strategy of national economic development and the new strategic line of channeling all efforts on the economic construction cover all sectors from the economic field to the public health, education, environment, city management, and so on. All measures by government for its achievement confirm to the efforts of ESCAP and the member states for SDGs implementation and will further contribute to the efforts of mankind for building a new world, peaceful and prosperous. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement. We have come to the end of our meeting this afternoon today. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Akbar, our distinguished speakers, and all our delegates for a very thought-provoking and insightful discussion. Thank you, too, to the audience, both here and in various other cities, for your participation. May I now request the Secretary of the Commission to make housekeeping announcement. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As mandated by the Commission, the Secretariat has been systematically assessing meetings under the conference structure to enable continuous improvement and to facilitate future evaluations. In this connection, we would like to announce that an evaluation questionnaire will be provided to each delegation for their consolidated feedback on the Commission session this year. Your feedback over the past several years has been very valuable and has informed the preparations for the subsequent Commission sessions. Therefore, we kindly request that each participating delegation please complete one questionnaire. We recommend completing the questionnaire at the end of the session. However, if you must depart early, kindly complete the questionnaire prior to your departure. Upon completion of the questionnaire, please deposit it into the evaluation box provided near the exit door or return it to your liaison officer. We do thank you for taking the time to provide us with your valuable comments and suggestions. I also have just an additional reminder, again, that tomorrow afternoon there will be the elections for the governing councils of the Asian and Pacific Training Center for Information and Communications Technology for Development, APC-ICT, and the Center for Sustainable Agriculture Mechanization. The deadline for nominations was reached on noon on Saturday. And yet again, just let me remind everybody of the nominees. They're available up on the screen. For APC-ICT, there's Azerbaijan, Bangladesh, Cambodia, India, Indonesia, the Philippines, the Russian Federation, Sri Lanka, Thailand, and Vanuatu. And for CSAM, the nominees are Bangladesh, Cambodia, India, Malaysia, Pakistan, Philippines, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Vanuatu, and Vietnam. As we have 10 nominees, but only 8 spaces, the balloting tomorrow afternoon will be conducted via secret ballot. Again, just a reminder, please mark only 8 of the 10 nominees for selection to the governing councils. The election will be held in Conference Room 1 between the hours of 2 and 4 p.m. tomorrow, 15th of May. Delegations are welcome to observe the process, the voting process, should you wish to be there. And I understand also some countries have also been speaking to other delegations in seeking support for election to the governing council. And finally, just one more reminder, at 6 o'clock downstairs in the dining room on the first level, we will have a reception hosted by the Executive Secretary for all delegates to the Commission session this year. So we look forward to seeing you in just about 45 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Secretary, Mr. Secretary. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, before closing this meeting, I would like to remind everyone that we will reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp here in ESCAP Hall to resume our deliberations on this agenda item. Again, thank you, and we'll see you at the reception downstairs. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you very much.
Thought that was tough.